I'm joined now by Congressman Mo Brooks, Republican for Alabama, who serves on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, are you concerned about the vacancies, particularly in the National Security Council, regional directors there, if there's a North Korea ICBM, if there's some kind of emergency starting at 4 p.m. tomorrow? Does it concern you that there aren't the folks there tasked with monitoring that?
No, I'm quite comfortable that the people that we have serving America, both in the intelligence agencies and in national defense, Pentagon-oriented, they are on watch, and they are there to protect America's security, and they will be able to do so throughout this transition phase from the Obama administration to the Trump administration.
Right, but I mean, it's not the transition tomorrow, right? Because it's as of tomorrow, it is the Trump administration. If you got the National Security Council unstaffed, I mean, I think you and I would agree the National Security Council is pretty important, right?
Well, the National Security Council is pretty important, but it's more important to get the right people in the right positions, and to do so in a deliberative way, if that's what is required, than it is to rush and get the wrong people in those positions. So I think Donald Trump and his administration is being very deliberate in making sure that they get the right people in the right places, even if it takes more time than it might otherwise.
And you think even if, in the case of, say, General Mattis asking for folks to stay on, even if it means getting rid of people so there are empty desks in the Pentagon because those folks may have been appointed by the previous president?
I'm quite comfortable that our new Secretary of Defense will be able to handle the circumstances as they are presented. And again, I have not seen anything that suggests that national security is at risk because of the way this transition is unfolding.
I want to ask you about an interesting quote I thought in Politico about Trent Lott, a former Republican senator, of course. A lobbyist close to several people in the transition said the transition team was relying on lobbyists and others for lists of potential hires and policy recommendations. Do you think it's a good idea to rely on lobbyists to tell you who to hire?
Well, I think Donald Trump and the transition team ought to be relying on as many people as they can in order to have the largest pool of applicants for the positions that need to be filled. That's the way that you get the person that you need to do the task that is required. So it's one thing to have an expansive list. It's another thing if you start picking people because of special interest influence, that influence being contrary to the interests of the United States of America. So let's wait and see who's appointed, who's filling these positions, before we start criticizing who might be in a rather large list. It's going to be culled down to one for each position.
I mean, Trent Lott did say relying, and I would also just ask if you think it's consonant with the general theme of the Trump campaign, which was, I think, embracingly so, and many people really cottoned to this, talking about the power of lobbyists, how bad they were, and the power of special interests.
Well, again, let's wait and see who's appointed. Don't judge now before we know how all these ingredients are going to be mixed and put together and baked into a cake. Let's see what the cake tastes like, looks like, before you start judging it at the very beginning just by looking at the ingredients. So I suggest that we take our time and be deliberative and see how all this is going to work its way out. Now, something that would really be helpful is if the Senate would more expeditiously approve some of our cabinet members, so that those cabinet members are then in a position to start reviewing these resumes and hiring people to fill the positions in their different cabinet positions.
Do you think it's okay to have hearings for someone in the cabinet if they haven't cleared their FBI background check or their ethics process?
Well, I would like to see everything done as thoroughly but also as expeditiously as possible. So you're having to weigh things. Yes, I would prefer that the FBI background checks be completed. Yes, I would prefer that the ethics issues, to the extent they are real and not manufactured, and we've seen a lot of manufactured by Democrats ethics issues that are really more smoke than substance. But you have to weigh that versus the inability to have the work done that needs to be done by a timely filling of the position by a qualified individual. So there's a balancing act there, and it's very difficult in this rather strident political environment that you're seeing in Washington, D.C., particularly as evidenced by how many Democrats have said they're just going to shun the system. They're not going to be here for the inauguration tomorrow. Or the Democrats who tried to strip about a dozen states of their influence over the election of the president, which occurred on the House floor on January 6th, where Democrats objected to the approval of the Electoral College votes of most of the southeastern states, but also West Virginia, Michigan, and Wisconsin. That's the kind of rebellion against the Constitution and against the normal transitions that we've seen in the past that you're looking at the Trump administration have to deal with.
You think that was a rebellion against the Constitution? That's your phrase?
Absolutely. When you're trying to strip the Electoral College votes of the states of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Michigan, West Virginia, and Wisconsin, when you're trying to say none of those votes count, that's a denial of the right to vote. And fortunately, the Democrats failed to have the votes on the House floor on January 6th to disregard the votes of those millions of Americans who had cast their votes for the presidency in good faith.
Congressman, the last thing about sort of rebellions against the Constitution and the toxic partisan atmosphere, what's the best precedent for the House, Senate, for the Senate Republicans refusing to even have a hearing for Merrick Garland for those 300 days of the last president's term?
Well, the reasoning behind what was done is quite simply we wanted the American people to voice their opinion on who they wanted on the Supreme Court, and they voiced it loud and clear. I'm not concerned about precedent. I'm concerned about doing what is right. And quite frankly, I believe it was a proper strategy that's going to result in a Supreme Court justice who's going to do the right thing as required by the Constitution and American law as passed by Congress, not as made up by supreme beings on any judicial body.
You are correct, Congressman, that a minority of Americans did ratify that choice. I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.